A warm welcome everyone to the post-lunch Track 20 session. Like the announcement was made, we are covering emerging regulatory issues, including online gaming, fintech, and technologies, including blockchain, crypto. We've got an esteemed panel here to parse through these regulations. My name is Vikram. I'm a partner with BTG Legal. We're a law firm advising, among others, on tech regulation-related matters. And it's a great honor to be moderating this panel. It's a very high-powered panel. Let me maybe, spend 5 minutes setting the scene and then we get into it. So over the past day or so, we've seen some great presentations. We've seen, a very good amount of knowledge shared about in India and abroad. We've seen subject matter experts who've been covering diverse matters like data privacy, which we've just seen India pass a Data Privacy Act as well. We have seen issues around platform liability, online content. We're also talking about regulating AI, including the EU AI Act, which was the last session before this one. And it's been a very illuminating discussion on the state of the regulatory tech ecosystem in India and abroad. I think this is the panel where, you see the real life impact of regulation. This is the panel where, to coin a phrase, the rubber will meet the road. The laws that, we have all been discussing over the past day or so, they're all very important and they're all very interesting to talk about only when there is a real life application. We have to, also parse the real life consequences that data privacy or AI regulation has for me and you in our day-to-day work environment. So, and we have, veterans from the industry for whom these laws are not theoretical. They are actually a hard fact of everyday life. They are something that these guys have to deal with every day. The industries represented here, online gaming, crypto, payment, fintech, online content, they are the subject matter and the focus of regulation around the world, including in India. How these industries deal with the regulation, how they parse regulation, how they render services when the regulations are actually, put in play, affects our day-to-day lives. So I'm very excited personally to learn about, how they are actually dealing with the regulatory upheavals, the regulatory changes that we see in India from day to day, and also maybe a bit of crystal gazing about what will come in the future. What is there in India already, but what is, coming down the pipeline in terms of regulations, which we will see trickle down to us as consumers because we are all patrons of these industries. Just a last word to set the scene, that we'll probably have a interactive discussion here. We want this to be as informal as possible. We want as much of, knowledge and experience to come out as, people are comfortable sharing. We'll probably, have a round robin sort of questions that I can pose to the panel. And about at the end, let's also try and have about 10 minutes of, audience questions. And if you can hold your questions until then, that'll be great. So I think, the subject matter, just to, summarize in front of us is the digital transformation across sectors, AI, fintech, smart data, Internet of Things, Web 3.0, Industry 4.0, Metaverse. We had a panel on that as well. These are all mega trends that depend on innovation and also regulation. And companies, as we will learn, need to essentially find their way around regulation compliantly and sustainably in order to succeed. Now, it can be challenging to find simple and commercially viable legal solutions in the regulatory field, as we learn. And this is where, this panel is here to guide us on how to do that. So let me maybe start with Kapil at the end here. I think, Kapil, the regulatory flavor of the week, I'm a tech lawyer, is the Data Privacy Act. It took us many, many years to, come to this data privacy draft. We tried a GDPR light model, did not work. We tried a slightly more simplified model, which actually seems to have worked. And this Data Privacy Act is notified, but it will be, put in force slowly, hopefully. Now, let's start, with this topic. That what do you see as the impact? What are the, top 5, top 4 items that you see coming out of this?
Thank you. It's always easy to go as the first speaker, but I'll try and make some sense out of it. I know we are in the post-lunch session. We'll try and keep it high level. So thank you so much, esteemed panelists, fantastic panel, all of you are part here. So let me begin by saying that one, congratulations, India finally has a substantive data protection law we've been waiting forever. So big release. Two, a good load of work for companies like us. I think all of us are kind of coming up to speed, getting to attend webinars from the likes of PG and others. So I'll probably just kind of elaborate or just lay down for your, for the benefit of this audience, how we are seeing the Personal Digital Data Protection Act impacting the online gaming sector, and request the panelists to chime in. So, a very interesting issue arising for consideration. Also, maybe let me begin with the elephant in the room, which is the sectoral overlap. Now, you see, the PDPA talks about setting up the data protection board, but hey, just a couple of months back, the Navy has come up with the Navy rules. We are now looking at the first of the SROs getting approved. So there is going to be very interesting overlap between what the SROs are going to be doing and what the Data Protection Board is going to be doing. So we'll see how that is clarified. And by the way, this is not agnostic. This is not limited to gaming. This is sector agnostic. There will be multiple sectoral overlaps with the Data Protection Board. So that's one issue which we'll have to deal with. And we'll start looking at answers soon. Secondly, I would say targeted advertising, right? So the other very active regulator we've seen with great respect is the Advertising Standards Council of India. They are already, online gaming companies seem to be one of their favorites. So we are kind of constantly receiving queries in terms of, hey, you've made a particular claim, can you substantiate it, and whatnot, right? So what happens to the role and ambit of the ASCII specifically on targeted advertising and data profiling, right? Thirdly, fraud detection and cyber offenses. Now, that's a huge minefield, right? So online. And we also receive and frequently, almost every time comply with the law enforcement requests, given that under the MeitY rules, you have a requirement to respond to these notices within 24 hours, right? So very short time frames. Now, what happens if you have to share data on a user and you do not have time for a just-in-time consent in that 24 hours? Or what if you receive a request, say, after midnight, and you have to respond within 6 hours, right? Where is the time to get a consent? And then what happens to that? And whether that will come under exemption, which it ideally should, right? Then what about data that's collected pre-PDPA, right? So what happens to that regime? Because there's already data lying with these companies that's been processed based on the privacy policies and consents. So for instance, let's say if companies are using data, personal data, to curate their platforms, to offer enhanced UI, user experience, and user interfaces, what happens to that data? And how do you take consent and notice requirements? And especially, under clause 6, the consent requirements themselves have to be specific, informed, unambiguous, so they with a clear affirmative purpose. So, so it's a very specific consent requirement. So the legislation is consent heavy. I'll probably also round off by saying that very interesting the way companies are going to start looking at legitimate use and the carve-outs. Because, let's say if a user voluntarily gives her data, seems to be a carve-out that you do not necessarily need consent in that scenario. Now, will platforms start using this particular voluntary giving of data? So let's say, to give you another example, right? Let's say I'm relocating countries and I hire a shipping company and I say, hey, this is my personal data. You can use it only for the purposes of, my relocation and for nothing else. Will that be a carve-out sufficient for the shipping company to not send me marketing emails, right? And then you can kind of extrapolate that to gaming. So what happens to those? And you'll start seeing very creative legal interpretations coming out of that. I'll probably end by saying that what about interoperability with current standards like the GDPR and the CCPA, which a lot of companies are already complying with? So we were keen to kind of start looking at some sort of interoperability coming out of these globally established mechanisms and the India PDPA, right? So those were some of the issues, Vikram, I thought we can open up with, but do not claim to be an expert on the personal data protection law. This is an evolving legislation and we'll have to study more to come to terms with it. But I thought it'll just give you a flavor, kind of issues lawyers like us, as well as business folks like yourselves, will have to grapple with over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Kapil. And that's a very valid intervention. And underlying all these things is also the cost of compliance, because compliance is more costly just because the bill has, now come into force. I see Ashish has joined us as well, and welcome. Maybe let me, then go to Samir first for a, quick first state of the union around, your industry, and then we'll go to Ashish. Similarly, I think, this is not the first or only law which impacts the industry. This is an industry which has, seen regulation throughout its life, even when it comes to real money gaming, when it comes to, online image rights. This is essentially an industry which is actually making law, getting law made in many ways in India. So what is your, similar 10,000 feet view on regulation?
So, I think regulation is important. Personally, if you ask me, regulation, it worked. Yeah. So to me, I'll come to the industry. Principally, look at regulation per se. Yeah. Is it better? Yeah. Okay. So regulation per se is important, especially when you look at offbeat industries. And the reason I say offbeat is because, see, one is the standard brick and mortar where nothing much is really going to change. But when it comes to, money, when it comes to various other pieces which are not really the traditional industries in the real sense, there will be perceptions that will play out. And then I think the largest issue that more than what the law says, what really gets kind of taken into more consideration is how it is perceived, and the perception becomes a large part of anything that a particular industry does. So when I look at the online real money gaming industry and kind of Kapil mentioned about the private privacy part, but I think the larger part is that when it comes to money, when it comes to people playing with money, there are bound to be other areas which will come in, especially if you look at the fact that somebody's playing, there is somebody's losing, somebody's winning. Who wins is happy, who loses is going to be unhappy, even though he voluntarily came in. And therefore, kind of it will create all sorts of issues that come in. So regulation, especially for industries like this, is good. It must come in. My view is that the regulation should be there. But I think that the big part is, what's the line of the regulation, in the sense that what do you regulate, how do you regulate, and do you make it difficult, or do you make it as an enabler, yet protecting kind of the people within the industry, be it whether the operators in the industry or the players in the industry. So 30,000 or 50,000 feet regulation is a must, especially industries like this. But the right regulation is what is important, and the regulation has to be more around the fact of that, whether it's a growth enabler or whether it is really putting you back by a few years or maybe forever, such that you're not really able to grow. First, that when you look at really the real money online gaming industry, there has been a taboo attached to it, gets linked back into what is typically called gambling and betting. Although there is a huge difference between gambling, betting, and online real money games of skill, because games of skill have been held by the Supreme Court and various other courts to be, kind of activities which are protected under 19(1)(g) of the Constitution. These are valid activities. These are protected, and these are not falling within the state remit or in a remit to say gambling, betting, which is generally under law prohibited today. If you go back to the Public Gambling Act, which is 1850 Act, which turns around 1857, I think, or something. But the fact is that does prohibit gambling. But there have been court judgments which have turned around and said that games of skill are excluded from that. And that's how each and every state has really turned around done. Most states have turned around, put that specific language to say that games of skill are exempted. Some haven't, but it's pretty much due to the kind of Supreme Court regulation, the cases and the various high courts. It is a given. Having said that, I think with the MeitY, which is the Ministry of Electronic and IT, they coming up with the IT rules has been a remarkable thing. I have to commend the fact that the government looked at it from the perspective that what is the right thing to do, and they kind of the kind of speed that they moved with is really amazing. Within a few, I think within about 5 months, they pretty much got the regulations out. December they started, April they were out. But rightly so, where they have turned around and said, let it be self-regulated. There will be a self-regulating body which will turn around and then approve games, register the gaming intermediaries. There are a whole lot of requirements that if you are providing a game, it must pass the muster such that only if they pass the muster does it get registered. Only if it gets registered are you allowed to provide the game. So clearly, from a regulation perspective, when it comes to whether online gaming companies can provide services and how, is something that is already there and the government's put in place. Of course, those rules are yet to be notified, or rather they haven't come into force. They have been notified, but they will, because there is a requirement that at least 3 SRBs or self-regulating bodies have to be formed. And only once they are formed, then after a period it will happen. And there is a whole lot of requirement that we will have to get into compliances. We will have to turn around and ensure we have a compliance officer, a nodal officer, and a grievance officer. Kind of if the players have a grievance, they can come. Companies have a grievance against the SRB itself, they can go. So, the right things that were required to be done have been done there. But having said that, I think the larger piece to me is, and I kind of just allude to this very, very briefly, is the government talking to each other, in the sense, are they talking inside? So you look at a situation where a MeitY comes up with the IT amendment rules, which turns around and provides ease of doing business, puts a lot more clarity. The CBDT comes out and says that the players who play and win kind of get taxed on their net winnings at 30%. There's a TDS. And then you have a curveball that comes and gets thrown at us by the indirect taxes to say GST at 28% on the full value of the bet. How do you do that? So in a way, you encourage an industry and then you say, let me kill it. So it's more like, regulation is a must, but regulation in the right sense, and when it kind of talks to each other and is balanced, is what the real thing is.
I think that's the byword, really. Regulation, like anything in excess, will not be good for your health. And I think this applies as much to our next speaker, Ashish, and his sector. Ashish, I think the similar question to you around crypto and non-fiat currency. Let's see, if you can hear us.
Yeah, Coach Alon. Yeah, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you, Ashish. So a similar question for you.
Cool.
Maybe your perspective on crypto regulations. Given the very strident stance that most nations have taken against it, and also where do you see regulation shaping around technology like blockchain in the future?
Yeah, so I want to correct you. It's not that most of the nations have regulated against it. I think maybe not more than 2 or 3. Most of the nations are trying to regulate it. They're trying to understand the technical nuances and how it impacts their economy. So I think most of the countries are in the process of regulating it. Coming back to India, yeah, definitely. I think this sector is like a love and hate sector for the government. I know personally that when I joined this company in 2021 or late 2021, there was some information leakage that government will again ban the crypto trading per se. But then I think I personally have seen that over last about 2 years, the understanding of the government has increased. They're trying to understand both blockchain technology. And one of the great testimony of Indian government trying to understand about this is that, and I also wrote in my blog that in last year, 2022 itself, in the calendar year, there were more than 100 questions asked by the parliament in the 0 hour on crypto, Web3, blockchain, technologies, assets. So which means that they are attempting they are trying their level best to get understanding about this sector, about technology, its impact on the economy, both good, bad, ugly. And this led to, I think, the first, I won't, talk about taxes, because I think tax currently has been a big nightmare of online gaming industry. We have been in the receiving end in 2022, where tax has almost killed the industry. Our volumes are down by more than 80-90%, and we have not been able to recover from that particular volume. So tax itself is a big dampener, and I think it's a industry killer. But apart from taxes, I think government has recently taken quite good steps. I would say baby steps. The most prominent one was to recognize the crypto industry or the various virtual asset service providers as reporting entity under the PMLA. So that actually takes out one level of kind of fear, from our mind, that in case any fraudster is misusing our system to launder the money, we should not come under the bus, although we are not the one involved in the illegal transaction. So, getting that recognition has actually, given some boost to us as industry to experiment, various new business plans. But I think the other good part is that the G20, presidency of India, and a lot of things have been spoken about how India wants to lead the charter by, bringing entire G20 countries on one page, and to have international collaboration for the crypto regulations, because as rightly said by our ministers, that no one country can either regulate it, no one country can also ban it, because cryptos are borderless, right? Now, what would be the right set of regulations? I think only time will tell. The problem comes here is that I think I personally see that although the talks are happening, the talk seems to be more positive.
Yeah, I think we are having technical difficulties here. Sorry, Ashish.
Yeah.
Are you back?
Yeah. So, I'm thinking that while some good talks are happening about India taking the lead in terms of international collaboration, but at least in India, we haven't seen any draft model law which has been placed before the people to comment and all. Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So, having said that, I think while India wants to take the lead in terms of shaping up the global regulations, but the G20 countries have already started to put the regulation in place, whether it is MICA in the EU or UK, Dubai or Singapore, Australia and Japan. They all have started to make some progressive regulation with some cautions. But India is still, they are just talking about that, they would want the world to come together and to regulate it. The world has started to regulate. We hope that, if not, let's say before the election, but maybe after the election, there is some sort of positive development in terms of introducing some draft paper on the crypto regulations. But, having said that, just to echo what Samir said, I think tax has been a big dampener. And at least tax is now becoming an industry killer for the new age industry. And I think the testimony is that how many unicorns India has produced in this year. You tell me how much money is now flowing into India in the crypto sector, in the blockchain sector, in the gaming sector, in the AI sector. I think this is not going to impact the job creation for others. It is also going to impact our professions, because if we have more and more new age technology companies in India, they receive FDI, there's a lot more employment opportunity, there would be a lot more disputes, there would be a lot more legal advisory. So it's gonna, I think if the industry continues to be impacted because of draconian taxes, this is also going to impact our profession a lot. So this means that it's not only that people like Samir and I have to, take the flag to the government and ask them to have some sort of reasonable taxes. I think we as a professional kind of outfit should also go and tell government that, hey, let's not kill the industry because you want to just earn some short-term gains.
And well said, Ashish. I think, all these industries, everything new is treated with suspicion and caution. When it becomes a lot more mainstream, then it's regulated. I think that's the life cycle that we see in a lot of industries. And I think, Sumit, in terms of the industries here, payment and fintech has, probably been around for the longest. Since 2010, when they contemplated the Payment Systems Act, which, made non-banking payment systems, a reality. And since then, there has been, regulation around mobile wallets, payment aggregation, payment processing, recently around digital lending. So this journey that, fintechs have been on has been quite eventful. Maybe your perspective on the regulatory, transposition for fintechs and payments, and where do you see this going?
Yeah, let me just start that it's indeed a honor to be here and a very special occasion because before I come to your question, because as you Prasanna sir is here, he was my first boss 15 years ago, and to be seeing him, he was the one who hired me, and probably one of the reasons I'm here wherever I owe it to him. So indeed a very special occasion for me. Coming back to your question, right? I think fortunately for us, with RBI, and RBI is a great regulator, right? They know and they have the pulse of the industry. They don't try to over legislate, and that's how we look at it. And they know when an industry, for fintech especially, right? And this still comparatively, obviously compared to some of the other industries there, but still, I'll say this is still probably a early stage, right? Maybe a mid stage, given we are almost 10 to 15 years into this industry. Let's look at the fintech industry, right? Right now, India is the third largest fintech ecosystem in the world. The value, fintech received almost 15% of the global investment, the Indian fintech, of the global private equity VC investment last year. Obviously, the 2023 has been another year where every industry has been impacted, right? So we are the number one in the world as far as the UPI in the real-time settlement is concerned, capturing over 46% of the global market of the real-time settlement, right? So UPI on the payment side has brought that revolution. All the with the Indian population and the young population, that has obviously led to growth on the smartphone, and that has also led to obviously the fintechs working with the people to offer some innovative products, right? You mentioned daily lending guideline. I think not only daily lending guideline, that was a great regulation, I think, which RBI came out with. We as at least people may have a different view about it, but I believe DLG, and if you look at the history, right, there were some genuine issues happening in the fintech industry because of whatever was happening with the Chinese loan scam, and a lot of manipulation by unregulated apps, right, were targeting small, uneducated, poor people, which was leading to a lot of issues and complaints, and that was escalated at the highest level, which led to a working committee, and very positive recommendations was there. And then as an industry, a lot of people made representation. A lot of it got eventually implemented, and clarity came in daily lending guideline. I think daily lending guideline in the fintech, I'll say that's a watershed moment, right? And earlier, the view was that fintechs were operating in a wild, wild west, right? There was only one regulation, which is the outsourcing, RBI outsourcing guideline, which was kind of, when we as lawyers, when I was on the practice side, service side, and when I came here, the only regulation I was, whenever we used to look at NBFCs or fintech, NBFCs partnering fintech, we used to wonder that there's only one regulation, and RBI actually didn't design that outsourcing to deal with a giant industry like fintech, right? With so much product innovation and technology at play here. So daily lending guideline creates that clear distinction that what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to do it, and under what control environment you can do it, and who's responsible. Because what also happens is that you're in a financial industry, right? It's a very, very important industry, right? You're dealing with money, right? And not everybody may be as sophisticated, as educated as people in this room, right? With our kind of population and demography, it's very important to understand that a regulator RBI is thinking about that last person on the road or on the street in a far-flung area, right? So how are they be protected, right? And that way, I think daily lending guideline has ensured that the kind of regulations which are there is that only serious strong player with robust governance, people who are ready to comply with a clear regulation. I don't think there's any ambiguity in the DLG guideline, right? That is one of the most clear regulation which is out there now. So at least as an industry, we know what we can do, what we cannot do, which is better than interpreting and coming out with cute structures and trying to make your own this and then realizing that probably that was not allowed, right? Because RBI, as I said at the start, that is a very active regulator, right? So they know what you're doing, and if you think you can come out with a very cute structure and that is going to fly with RBI, eventually it won't, right? So, and if you look at, so that's about DLG, right? And with that distinction, and that has also led to a lot of fintechs realizing that if they really want to be in lending, then either you work with, because earlier in the fintech pre-DLG, there was an ICD model, there was huge question about a renter model, NBFC model, right? Where fintechs were kind of riding on the license of NBFC. There were a lot of NBFC license which were cancelled, right? And of NBFCs who would practically lend their license to these fintechs, right? So post this DLG, there is absolute clarity. And if you see how RBI listens to the industry demand, I think FLDG, some of people who are aware of the industry, right? There was a huge, that was one point, right? When FLDG got abolished between the non-regulated entity, right? It was only allowed as vis-a-vis regulated entity. But there were so many representations made, and within 3 months, right, RBI came out and recognized that okay, there is that, and it has to be done in a controlled manner, because the credit risk, the premise of that was the credit risk cannot be passed on to an unregulated entity. But RBI listened and they allowed up to 5% of FLDG, right? So which is which also shows that if there are genuine demands from the industry and if you have valid reason for it, obviously that is there. In terms of what other regulation, how it's impacting the fintech, I think one of the, I also mentioned UPI and the fact that we own control over 46% of the global real-time settlement, is that there's an offline payment aggregator, right, which is in the works. We also online PA, which RBI came out with. A lot of people, including us, got the authorization. And that also extends on the merchant side, the offering on the merchants on the online space. And offline payment aggregator is something which we know is in the works, which will ensure that between the UPI and the POS, because if you see what is offline payment, which is part of the entire payment system, it's the UPI side and the POS side, where also we're going to see some regulation in coming months, right? Account aggregator is one example, which is really right between the data absorbers, right? And how RBI recognized the importance of, and that has made life of people like us in the room so simpler, because you don't really have to go to multiple places. You just, through one system, through technology, you can just have all the financial information shared between one entity to another. The RBI, if you see the regulatory sandbox also, which RBI has, right, which is again, that's why at least financial services feel out of all the regulators, probably when the entire UPI 123 Lite, right, what was happening is that through that, with a UPI, right, even people who don't have smartphone can access UPI, right? So there have been a lot of positive regulations which has come in fintech sector, and this is a very interesting time for the sector.
No, and you're quite right that it shows the benefit of a strong regulator. A regulator who knows the business, and you see that they're able to then tailor regulations and plug in gaps when as required. Kapil, I come back to you. I think and this is a very opportune debate, maybe a longer one around a strong regulator centrally or self-regulation. Particularly in your sector when it comes to and there can be impacts on very serious things like self-harm, children's data privacy, children's health, mental health. So self-regulatory versus a strong central regulator. Your views?
Thank you. Very apt topic, Vikram. Thank you so much. So I'll just maybe introduce the audience to this concept. I know a lot of you are already familiar with it, but it's going to become the buzzword, at least in the online gaming industry now, if it's not already, is something called this concept of responsible gaming, right? I mean, Samir and I kind of talk about it almost on a day-to-day basis. So where the origin of this really is the responsible gambling framework. We don't use the word gambling and betting in India because we are obviously games of skill versus games of chance. But if you see the personal data protection law, the MeitY guidelines for online gaming intermediaries, what's really come out as a core theme is this whole concept of user safety, player protection, right? So I'll maybe just give you a few instances on what we, and our platforms like Jungly Games and others, including Play Games, what we are doing is, obviously thinking very deeply on responsible gaming guidelines. What responsible gaming really means is player protection, which is one, you let users decide how much amount they want to play on a day-to-day basis. And if you want to break that down further, you start putting player limits. So let's say, and by the way, a lot of data and analytics goes behind the scenes, which is interesting because and we're just to get Sumit's point around the account aggregator model, which is built for player protection and built for privacy, is that let's say if you know, and by the way, we don't, but if you know the credit history of a player, right? Can you start imposing player limits to say, hey, you can't play more than say 1,000 rupees in a day? And these are established frameworks in mature jurisdictions like the UK already, where based on a player's credit history and background and a credit score, platforms can decide how much amount a player can play on a day-to-day basis. And by the way, there are filtering mechanisms which are now coming into place, which is what is the source of these funds, right? So you have the PMLA guidelines, the anti-money laundering. So all that's coming into through the regulation. Secondly, self-exclusion, right? So let's say if I'm playing on the platform today, I can't because I'm an employee of Jungly and we have policies that employees can't play. But let's say if I'm not a Jungly employee and I'm playing on the platform, I will start having something called voluntary self-exclusion. So what I'll do is the moment, say, I start beginning, and the platform, sees that, hey, look, you've lost, say, X thousand rupees. We start sending prompts, right? User prompts, in-app messaging, which says, look, we believe that you've lost X amount of money. Please, consider stop playing, right? So that's again user protection. I'll quickly close the point on child protection, which is, by the way, front and center for all of us. Also because we happen to be responsible parents as well. Is that I would not want my 15-year-old twins to play before they are 18 or 19, right? And to that extent, all of our policies, if you go online and if you look at our terms of service, you will see that players below 18 are simply not allowed to play. And if you probably ask me, hey, what's the check that you impose on that? It's simple, right? We track your KYC, we make sure you have a PAN card and Aadhaar card, so we get your, we want to make sure you are over 18, right? So those are just some of the examples on, helpful regulations coming to protect the players, to protect children, because government is extremely sensitive, and so are we, by the way, as responsible, mature platforms, to make sure, one, the players are protected. This is an alternative means of entertainment for them, and mindful that some of them use this as an alternative means of livelihood, which we also respect. Thirdly, children have to be protected at all costs, right? I think it's not a shibboleth anymore. It's core to what we are as a platform, which is child protection, player protection is really at the core of what we do. So I'll probably stop here, Vikram, and say that this is really front and center and occupying a lot of attention of all our platforms.
Thanks, Kapil. That's very helpful. And maybe, Samir, I can come to you with a similar point that, there are regulations protecting children, regulations preventing online harm, but online fraud. But they can also be sometimes unintended consequences. To take a quick example that, for example, if we, as a platform, you're required to have very stringent gating requirements for children, that is a cost for you. You might then choose to exclude children from your product. So there are these unintended consequences that we all have to be careful about, and these might be regulations that have a good intention in mind, but they might actually end up shrinking the sector, or even depriving some people of the product itself.
So see, I think the key is really to find the right balance, because at the end of the day, you're right, and like Kapil, kind of indicated the whole thing about responsible gaming, responsible gameplay, protecting children, user arm safety, all of that is critical. Clearly, if the regulations require us to do that, we will happily do it. We in fact do it ourselves. But I think the larger piece is you have to look for the right balance, because classic example of what you're saying is that, can the state now turn around and say, you know what, I'm not going to allow more people to play for more than 2 hours a day? And I think that becomes a little, kind of in the area of what I would say is realm of really imposing or superimposing things which are not really relevant. I mean, I completely agree with the age gating, because you don't want children, etc., to play. I mean, they're still at a point where they need to be doing other things. But if you were to then say that, oh, hang on, but you can only play online games or online real money games on a Saturday from between 12 to 2. I mean, that just doesn't work, right? Because then that's also getting into the realm of really getting into the fundamental right of a person. And so therefore the regulations must find the right balance. The right balance is required from the perspective that the industry continues to grow. The users or the customers or the players are protected. The regulation is such that the industry, or for that matter, the ecosystem thrives. Because at the end of the day, one of the points that Ashish mentioned, and obviously online gaming and crypto are different, but the fact is that ultimately they all create jobs, right? There is a huge ecosystem. There are jobs that get created. If I look at the online gaming industry today, there are close to about 100,000 jobs that are dependent on this sector. You turn around and put things which will turn around and kill the sector. You're also talking about 100,000 jobs with a number of, say, even if you take an average of 3 or 4 people in a family, and the other kind of ecosystem that runs around it. I mean, you are turning around and killing the economy. So to that extent, I think balanced regulation is what is important. User harm, of course, is paramount, and you should not allow anything that turns around and actually put, say, a customer in danger. And it's not right even from an industry perspective. Imagine my customer's in danger, tomorrow he goes away. What am I left with? So you don't kill the hen that lays eggs, right? That's how it is.
Yeah, and that's quite well put, Samir. I think these industries are all they're addressing demands. They're addressing demands that are out there.
I'll add another thing, because see, at the end of the day, and why I said balanced regulation is because these industries are not going anywhere. That's the future. And I think it's important to understand that tech is the future. Tech is how it will be. You look at everything around you as tech, right? I mean, the cars that you drive are full of tech today. The houses you live in are full of tech today. Pretty much, the way you buy stuff is full of tech. So there is nothing without tech today. I mean, even let's take for a minute, go back to the brick and mortar industry. Even when you build a house and you're buying supplies for your house, that is still coming through a various tech mode and all of that. So to that extent, without tech, there is no life in the future. There's no future. And if that be the case, then you can't turn around and then have a situation where you're killing what the future is.
Quite right. I'm conscious of the time, and I do want to give maybe a few minutes for audience questions. Let me, maybe go to Ashish for a, final reactions for a couple of minutes, and then have, give Sumit the final word. So Ashish, just your, final reaction on the state of regulation, particularly, given that things like, crypto and blockchain are proven use cases, successful use cases. And, the only question is implementation in a regulatory manner to, balance harm and benefit. So just, your final maybe take on this in a couple of minutes. Yeah, maybe, Subhi, then let me come to you a very similar question about, a little bit of crystal gazing around fintechs. That it's once again, a field that's been at the forefront of technological revolution. And India has been one of the most innovative payment fintech. If you actually go abroad, you're surprised sometimes by how primitive some countries' payment infrastructure actually is. So there are new technologies coming in. We have AI panels going on. We have other technologies coming up. What do you think is the future in fintech?
I think we all saw a picture on X a few days ago with the German counselor ambassador using a UPI to pay a vegetable vendor, and how amazed he was with that technology, right? That is a great validation of what we are building and the payment infrastructure what India is building. So, technology, I'll say, is the heart of it, right? And I'll give you a few examples. We are one of the largest offline payment aggregators in India, right? In terms of QR, the small shopkeepers, right? And what we also help is to provide them credit facility, because these are the people who probably banks are not going to lend, and they are still, and that happened during COVID, and especially during COVID, is that they're forced to take money from the local money lenders at an exorbitant rate, right? And when you, through the technology, right, because you have nothing to underwrite them. What do banks and large NBFCs? You need to have probably a Form 16, Form 16A, bank statement, and a whole bunch of things, right? Or a GST registration if you're on a business side, for you to be given any sort of a lending facility. A lot of people who we help take money, right, from our partners and from our own NBFC now, are the people who have probably never had a bank account also, but obviously because of the Jandhan and because of the smartphone, cheaper smartphone facilities which are now available, and because of the UPI infrastructure, what you're able to do through AI is that you can, through the generative AI, you can have better, you can use tools to underwrite them better, because you also have a visibility on their cash flow, right? Whether they're using a Paytm QR code or a BharatPay QR code or a PhonePe QR code, and so on and so forth, right? So the AI helps to analyze alternate data, right, which also helps to give some factors for any sort of a credit facility to be built, and that we fintech or the UPI system, the ecosystem between the banks as acquiring bank and the payment aggregators who are acting on behalf of the bank, right, on the P2M, and they're able to offer that. The other is if you see even on the chat box, right, how AI is helping. What we introduced is to have linguistic rural language chat box, and that what we saw after doing that for a couple of months is that the usage even of the payment, of the digital payment, shot up, because these people have very innocuous questions, but when you're doing that probably in English or Hindi on a platform, you're not able to really reach out to that mass you're trying to reach. UPI is not about tier 1, right? People in the room, right? It's about the remotest of the village, right? Where because of the smartphone, people can be reached out. And I think that's where AI is really helping, right? To enhance the customer experience. Even on the legal and compliance side, I think if you see some of the reg techs, which are there, right? And not only for fintech, but for anyone, because of the technology they're deploying, right? That is what fintechs also to ensure that everything is being tracked, because there's so many regulations to look at, and you're fully compliant, right? On a real-time basis, rather than you spending hundreds and thousands of hours through different regulation to try and see what kind of compliance is being done. So there are immense usage of the technology in fintech, and that ways I think all the fintechs are at the forefront to use this, right? The social spend, the chat box, the virtual bot, even to offer financial products, right, to old people, to predict the spend and then come out with a plan of a good financial plan or a financial product, right? All of that today, lot of fintechs are actually using AI to do that, and continuously to improve the lives of people.
And I think that's a great time to end the panel. I'm hoping that we have maybe a minute for some questions from the audience. So if there's any questions for the panel, please raise your hands. We'll get a mic to you. I think, please feel free to, approach the speakers offline as well if you have any questions. But I think this has been a very illuminating panel, and thank you to all the speakers, for your time and expertise here. And we continue to, watch these industries in particular. I think they will continue to drive innovation and, be the cause of regulation, regulatory, developments in the future. Thank you, everyone.